women have always played the role of being the emotional stress absorbers of their environment. So they tend to take on the stresses of their spouses and their families. In the modern world, stresses are mostly emotional, and the biggest stress of all is trying to be something other than who you are. So if this takeaway lesson here, it's get to know who you are and be who you are. We need to regain that sense of agency and actually looking at our lives and our patterns and our dynamics and really being open about it and being supremely curious and not judging ourselves. Oh God, I failed, I was too nice, I pushed myself down. No. But ask yourself, okay, why was I doing that? And do I really need to do that? Let me talk to you about stress for a moment. So stress has three components, and this is maybe the takeaway. There's the external event called the stressor. It depends on the individual of how they perceive and experience a particular event. So the first component of the stress reaction is the event, okay? The third and final component of the stress reaction is the physiological stress response with the adrenaline, the cortisol, and the nervous system, and the gut, and the heart, and really the whole body. But in between the external event and the physiological reaction is what we can call the processing apparatus. And the processing apparatus is you and I, with our particular interpretations, our beliefs, usually unconscious interpretations, unconscious beliefs, internal and emotional dynamics that we have no control over, until we become conscious of them. So really the whole point of this talk is to become conscious of what's happening inside us. Now, I can give you a personal example. Going back, say, 20 years ago, my wife's name is Ray, and let's say I would ask her to sleep with me one night, and she'd say no. How does this guy respond when his wife of, at that time, 30 years, says no, not tonight? Well, in my case, I would curl into a fetal ball, wish that I was dead, and next morning I couldn't even look her in the eye. And what's that all about? Well, of course, you'd say it's about abandonment and rejection. But I wasn't being abandoned or rejected. She just said not tonight, for any number of reasons. What it's really about is that when I was 1 year old, and some of you who know my life history may know this, I was given to a total stranger by my mother, and I didn't see her for 5 or 6 weeks. And this was to save my life in wartime Hungary in December of 1944. I was just under a year old. John Bowlby, the great British psychiatrist and researcher of attachment, talked about the infant's or the young child's response when the mother doesn't show up. These studies were done here in Britain. The first response of the infant or the child, actually the young child, is anxiety when the mother doesn't come back. The second response is depression. It kind of gives up. Life is not worth living without the mom. And then the kid starts acting normally. He'll eat again, he'll interact and play again. And when the mother does come back, this has happened when kids were hospitalized and the mothers were told not to visit because it's too upsetting for the kid to see the mother come and go, which is wrong, but this is how they did it. The child is physiologically stressed. Her heart rate goes up, but she won't even look at the mother. And Bowlby calls this defensive detachment. It's a self-protection. The message is, I was so hurt when you abandoned me that I will not make myself vulnerable again to that same degree of pain. And these reactions get programmed into our brains, so much so that 5 decades later, my wife, who I know loves me very much, has been through all kinds of stuff with me, says no one night, and I go into the physiological mental response of the infant, and I won't even look at her until I become conscious that this is what's happening. When I become conscious, I can say to myself, well, oh, okay. I'm just telling a story to myself. The story of rejection and abandonment is just a story. And even if I was being rejected and abandoned, I'm not a helpless infant anymore. But you see, we all tell ourselves these stories. And these stories often run our lives. And to the extent that they're unconscious, and to the extent that we keep suppressing ourselves for the sake of attachment, for the sake of being accepted and loved and respected and accepted by others, and we're disconnected from our true selves, to that extent we're stressing ourselves, and to that degree we're actually making ourselves sick. And from that point of view, illness comes along to teach you something. Now, I'm not inviting you to get sick to learn this lesson. Nobody wishes that on anybody else whatsoever. What I am saying is that when illness does come along, or when they did get sick, rather than just simply see it as a calamity to battle against, they also saw it as an opportunity to learn. And what people keep learning over and over again is how they had not been themselves. Illness came along to bring them back to themselves. That's what they keep learning. Nobody should be a passive recipient of anybody else's care. We need to regain that sense of agency. Is that sense of agency of actually making the decisions and actually looking at our lives and our patterns and our dynamics and really being courageous about that and being open about it and being supremely curious and not judging ourselves. Oh God, I failed, I was too nice, I pushed myself down. No. But ask yourself, okay, why was I doing that? And do I really need to do that? Am I still really that infant, a young child, who needs to choose attachment over authenticity? And yes, I may lose some friends who are used to me being this particular way, and that's what they signed up for. But my true friends will celebrate me for finally being myself. The Canadian stress researcher Hans Selye, himself from Hungary like myself, and he coined the word stress, the way we use it today. He said that in the modern world, stresses are mostly emotional, he said, and the biggest stress of all is trying to be something other than who you are. So if this takeaway lesson here, it's get to know who you are and be who you are. The true self, the authentic self, is never lost. In fact, there's a very interesting word that we use when it comes to illness or addiction. What's the word that we use when people get better? They recover. What does it mean to recover? It means to find something. Well, if you find it, it means it could never have been lost in the first place. So I think that healing is always, well, I don't want to say always. I mean, at a certain point, people are diagnosed at terminal stages where nothing they're going to do is going to relieve them of the burden of illness. But often, becoming conscious, having some agency in your life can make a huge difference. If we only supported people in doing so. Now, let me go back to this question of women and multiple sclerosis. Women have always played the role of being the emotional stress absorbers of their environment. So they tend to take on the stresses of their spouses and their families. They still play that role, for the most part. But on top of that, since the 30s and the 40s, they've also taken on an economic role. But they have not given up the other role. It's not that they haven't given it up. Society hasn't relieved them of it. The men haven't stepped up, for the most part, to share that emotional burden. So women are still carrying that. But now they got the economic role as well. And they're doing so in the context of less social support, because there's all kinds of reasons why they're in this neoliberal economy and this stress culture, people are more and more isolated. So you got more stress, more isolation. Of course you're going to have more autoimmune disease. About 75 or 80% of autoimmune disease actually happens to women. And I believe all that can be reversed if we become conscious. The role of emotions in general is to keep out what's unhealthy and unwelcome and to let in what is desirable and welcome. So emotions keep out what's unwanted and toxic, allow in what's healthy. What is the role of the immune system? It's the same thing. Now we know that the immune system and the hormonal apparatus and the emotional apparatus and the nervous system are not separate systems, which simply means that when we suppress any part of it, including the psychic apparatus, we're actually affecting the other parts as well. And that's why it's so important to know the distinction between healthy anger and unhealthy anger, because when you suppress the healthy anger, you're actually affecting every aspect of your physiology. What is usually pushed on in depression? It's anger. And the problem is, when we pushed on one of our emotions, it's hard to experience the others. And now there's this joyless, negative, hopeless experience of depression. It does begin as a coping mechanism in childhood, when the environment could not tolerate your emotions, so you learn to push them down. And then later on, you'll be diagnosed with depression.